When a planned revenge begins, there is only hatred. Only coercion or being forced can be considered a threat. And you simply do not exist. There is enmity between us. You hate me. If I truly hate someone, then with such a method, it is simply not enough to achieve my revenge goals. So what do you want, Daphne Snow? I am waiting for you to regret and come back to plead with me. There will never be such a day. Immediately launch distractions. Who dares to rethink Ernest Stark is the enemy of my story. I will make Ernest Stark's stocks turn into waste paper overnight. When, for the sake of parents and family, one concedes, it is pain. I regret it. Pleasing me, Victor Gale, you are shameless. You took my body and it's not enough, you still have to destroy my heart. Then you must obediently endure it. Betrayed by your good sisters, how do you feel? I, the president of the story, lofty and proud, how could I care about other situations or others' thoughts? I only seek my own pleasure, even if it means lowering joy upon others' suffering. When facing someone I love but cannot have, that is love, you are my woman, except for the gaze. I'm sorry, I thought you wouldn't come to save me. As long as I can stay by your side. Daphne Snow, I'm willing to do anything. Ernest Stark, what do you think you are? What point do you have that can compare to me? What right do you have to be by his side? When the unstoppable power and status clash, it's hatred, Victor Gale. You can't protect your woman. I'm not the kind of woman who is easily impressed, no one else is entitled to admire me. 3 years later, did I really fall for him? Falling for someone I should hate. When everything truly wants to be unveiled layer by layer, it's love. I'm willing. Victor Gale, I really want to date you. Actually, it's just a game. 1 month, a year, or a lifetime, even if it's a substitute, if it's a lifetime, I am willing. Daphne Snow felt like she was being toyed with in Victor Gale's hands, her heart trembling fiercely. The bracelet was something she had picked up when she bent down, carrying the mark of humiliation, and that was why he had spoken to make her wear it. Was this reminding me to know my place? Her body shook as she swayed, her face growing paler under the light, resembling a piece of paper, fragile and pitiful. She looked at the bracelet she had just put on, suddenly sneering at herself with a scornful smile. What if I don't like it? What could liking or disliking change? Victor Gale turned around, pointed at the necklace on the counter, then took it from the staff and put it on Daphne Snow himself. His fingers touched her delicate white neck, cold and cruel. He whispered, "It's best if you like it, if you don't like it." But didn't finish the sentence. Daphne Snow's heart felt suspended in the air as she warily looked at him, her body tense. He gazed at the necklace along with her worried expression, curling his lips slightly, then the teasing words slipped out uncontrollably, "Then you must obediently endure." The heart hung in the air, wounded by the sparkling words of Victor Gale, leaving countless scars. Pain shattered on the ground. Even if she didn't like it, she had to endure. "I will be as you wish." Endure well, Victor Gale. Not knowing whether to be stubborn or to compromise, she did not refute. She only obediently responded to his words. Victor Gale once again looked towards Daphne Snow. His gaze was unclear, revealing complex emotions that were indescribable. In the very next moment, he smiled. The smile sent chills down one's spine. A voice slipped softly from between his lips, "It's very easy to understand that you must know your place." She obediently listened. Wasn't that exactly what Victor Gale wanted? The bitter traces echoed at her lips. Daphne Snow's voice was very low. Low enough to lose any trace of spirit. But this still could not soften him. "What did you just call me?" he asked slowly, his smile carrying a sense of instruction. "I think, instead of calling me Victor Gale, you should address me as Master Gale. This form of address would be more appropriate." Daphne Snow hesitated slightly. She bit her lip and said nothing. Then, the jewelry from the store was brought over by the staff. Everything was carefully packaged and sent off with the two of them as they slowly left. Daphne Snow pushed open the door of the hospital room. Inside, due to the curtains being drawn, the light appeared somewhat dim. In the line of sight appeared the figure of a man. A tinge of bitterness filled Daphne Snow's throat for no apparent reason. Although Ernest Stark had prepared himself mentally very thoroughly beforehand, his anxious heart still skipped a beat. The figure of a tall and handsome man with deep, ink-like eyes was staring intently at Daphne Snow. The corners of his thin lips curled slightly, forming a faint arc of mockery. I've been waiting for you for a long time. What about your mother? Daphne Snow was at a loss for words, her voice turning cold and hoarse. Victor Gale merely raised his index finger to his lips, signaling Ernest Stark to be silent. The doctor had just administered a sedative, she was asleep. Daphne Snow gently walked to the door of the inner room and opened it. The person lying on the hospital bed was breathing very steadily, sound asleep. The pain of illness had tormented her greatly, only after receiving the sedative could she sleep peacefully. A gentle voice from Victor Gale came from behind, but it sounded more like a threat. The Stark family is drowning in debt and is about to go bankrupt. And your mother means there is no money for treatment. Don't you think you should do something for your family? Daphne Snow's footsteps paused, her face stiffened. At that moment, a warm breath slowly approached from behind, and she could clearly feel the masculine presence getting closer. The classic perfume gently enveloped her, filling the air with its delicate scent. Daphne Snow's body suddenly trembled as a drop of water fell on her back, sliding down from the solid chest of the man behind her. "Let me go," she demanded, her voice shaky but resolute. "Your mother needs money for surgery," came the deep, soft reply, echoing dangerously in her ear. His strong arm slowly tightened around her waist, pulling her closer. The crushing debts of the Stark family weighed heavily on her mind, and the thought of her father, who had used insider information to manipulate the stock market years ago, only added to the burden. He had always faced the risk of going to jail, and now it was catching up with them. "You're threatening me," Daphne retorted instinctively, but even she could hear the tremor in her voice, betraying her fear and helplessness. Victor Gale's eyes glinted coldly as he responded, his voice deep and cutting. "Threatening? Only coercion or force can be called a threat. And you," he paused, his gaze piercing into hers, "you simply don't exist." Her breath hitched. "What do you mean?" Victor Gale's face remained unreadable, his tone colder than ice. "Do you remember the phone call earlier? What did I say to you?" Ernest Stark, standing silently nearby, watched with a faint smile. The Stark Group, due to her father's reckless decisions, had made a disastrous investment. Daphne Snow now faced an unprecedented crisis, with their company on the brink of collapse. Meanwhile, her mother lay in a hospital bed, clinging to life, and in desperate need of an expensive surgery. Her voice trembled as she repeated what she had heard earlier. "You said you could help revive the Stark family, arrange for my mother's surgery, and keep the evidence of my father's crimes hidden, so no one would pursue it." Victor Gale smiled, the corners of his lips curling with a mixture of amusement and cruelty. "That's right. And I also told you I was in your mother's hospital room, which is why you rushed here." She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself against the suffocating pressure in the room. His aura was dangerous, suffocating. "So, what do you need in return to help me?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Instead of answering right away, Victor Gale slowly moved his cold hand from behind her, placing it gently on her delicate face. His fingers grazed her skin, soft yet chilling, and for a moment, his deep-set eyes seemed to light up with something unreadable. Then, the faintest hint of sarcasm appeared in his expression as a slow, mocking smile spread across his face. "When you came here, you already knew what I wanted from you, didn't you? You knew what kind of transaction we would be discussing, and what price you'd have to pay." Daphne Snow felt a shiver run through her at his touch, the coldness from him wrapping around her like a demon's embrace. She didn't understand why, but that icy sensation seemed to seep deep into her soul. It was as though there was something more profound lurking beneath the surface, an unspoken enmity. Between us, there's hatred, she thought. He suspects I hate him, and he hates me in return. Victor Gale chuckled, the sound dark and quiet, like the stillness of snow falling in the dead of night. You're afraid, he stated matter-of-factly, though his words came out so devoid of emotion that it felt like an accusation. Does this fear mean anything to you? Victor Gale asked silently. It doesn't matter. His gaze revealed his sense of superiority and his understanding of their dynamic. Because you, he said, are not worthy of my contact. His cold eyes shifted to Ernest Stark, who stood across from them. There was something unmistakable in Victor's gaze. It was hatred, deep and palpable. Inside him, a wave of humiliation and anger rose, but he swallowed it all, letting it dissolve into the reality of the moment. He endured it, tilting his head slightly as if to avoid the breath exhaled by Ernest Stark. His commanding presence seemed to fade, bit by bit. I think, Daphne thought to herself, I am not the type that Victor Gale likes. Aside from this, you have no other choice. The words were soft, like delicate flowers, but their weight was heavy, like the final judgment of the King of Hell. Daphne Snow stared intensely, her gaze filled with a cold ruthlessness and complete indifference. Ernest Stark, he was utterly shameless. Yet, his anger only blossomed into a mocking smile. He taunted that he was the embodiment of endless mockery, and still, she chose the path of unofficial compromises, slowly submitting before someone so despicable as him. Accepting defeat and then, in the end, surrendering your self-respect, letting others trample over you, is that what you've come to? His sneer cut through the tension. You. Daphne's face flushed, shifting from a sickly green to a furious red, her 5 fingers clenched tightly into a fist. Don't dream about it. I will never submit to you. She glared at him, her voice firm with determination. Starkworth has stood firm in the business world for years. Besides you, I refuse to believe that no one else can help us. After saying this, Daphne Snow opened the door and rushed out, leaving without another word. Really? Victor Gale's cold voice echoed down the corridor, each word carefully measured, his tone sharp like the chill of ice. Are you that confident? He whispered under his breath, his gaze hard as stone. Daphne Snow, I will wait for you to regret it. You will come back and beg me. That day will come. Her figure vanished at the end of the corridor, her mouth set in firm defiance. But inside, confusion and anxiety twisted through her heart. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't hide her growing panic. Father, she cried out in her mind as she stormed out. In the hospital room, Victor Gale withdrew his cruel attitude. He called his assistant inside. CEO. Immediately release the news. Anyone who dares invest in Ernest Stark will be my enemy. Understood, sir. I will handle it right away, the assistant responded obediently. And one more thing, release the information about Ernest Stark. Let everyone know he once manipulated the stock market. I want his stocks to turn into worthless scraps of paper overnight. Victor Gale's voice echoed throughout the sterile hospital room, cold and unrelenting. The assistant trembled slightly at the harsh command. It was clear, the CEO was preparing to take extreme action this time. He cautiously asked, shall we hand over the evidence of Ernest Stark's manipulation to the police, sir? Victor's ink-like eyes narrowed, long and deep. He paused for a moment, then smirked, the corner of his lips curling up. No, not for now. Everything is under control. Why rush? This is merely a lesson for Ernest Stark, a warning to Daphne Snow. The assistant nodded, watching his boss closely. It was obvious, Victor Gale wanted to deal with the Stark family, but he wasn't in a hurry. Like a noble hunter playing with his prey, Victor wouldn't devour them immediately. No, he would keep them close, tormenting them slowly, relishing every moment of their suffering. It thrilled him, excited him, the fortune of the powerful. Danger still loomed, a storm brewing in the distance. Tonight was destined to be a night of turmoil. The rock had already begun to crumble. After the news broke, it only took one short night for the situation to spiral out of control. The crisis worsened, and no one seemed to care about the Stark family's downfall. A rock had been shattered, and the public relations department complained endlessly as they scrambled to contain the fallout. But it was too late, the storm had already descended. Anxiety weighed heavily on the employees at the lower ranks of the company, as uncertainty and fear began to spread. The shareholders swiftly convened an emergency meeting, voices loud and filled with panic, demanding that Ernest Stark be removed from his position as chairman. Before the first wave of crisis could be resolved, another crashed down. No sooner had the meeting ended than officials from the Business Crime Investigation Bureau stormed into the conference room, heading directly for Ernest Stark. Sweat broke out on Ernest Stark's brow, his body trembling as he collapsed to the ground, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. In a matter of minutes, he was taken away by the authorities, leaving behind a trail of shock and disbelief. Meanwhile, Daphne Snow's mother lay in a hospital bed, her condition deteriorating. In the midst of the chaos, Ernest Stark's secretary, desperate and anxious, sought out Daphne Snow. "Miss Snow, this is bad. The chairman has been taken by the police," the secretary blurted out, his voice filled with urgency. Daphne Snow froze in place, her mind reeling as she tried to comprehend what was happening. Her world seemed to shatter with each passing second. "The chairman has been accused of manipulating the stock market years ago. They're bringing him in for questioning," the secretary explained, gasping for breath. Her mind raced, the weight of the news hitting her like a hammer. Ernest Stark, her father, was being taken away, and everything was falling apart. The secretary continued, his voice trembling, "Because of this, whether it's true or not, the situation is already devastating. The company's interests are severely affected, and the shareholders want to replace the chairman. Moreover, Stoneworks has broken its financial chain. The company is in an unprecedented economic crisis. No one is willing to invest or help. Miss Snow, I'm afraid Stoneworks won't survive this." The words seemed to echo in Daphne's head as the enormity of the situation sank in. Even the Woods family, with whom her father had a long-standing relationship, refused to extend a helping hand. Last night, the secretary added gravely, news spread that anyone associated with Gaines is an enemy of Victor Gale. And Gaines is the kingpin of the entire trade empire. No one dares to oppose him, let alone risk their businesses because of the Snow family. The realization hit Daphne like a punch to the gut, this was all orchestrated by Victor Gale. He had manipulated everything, ensuring that no one would dare assist her family in their time of need. She remembered his words from the previous night, how he had arrogantly told her that there were always investors willing to help in the business world. In just one night, he had turned his threats into reality, leaving her with nothing. He had fulfilled his promise to bring ruin to her family, and now she was standing at the edge of disaster. Victor Gale's voice echoed in her mind, "I'm waiting for you to regret it and come back to beg me." Once, she had been proud, certain she could find a way to overcome anything, confident in her ability to handle the challenges life threw at her. But now, standing in the wreckage of her father's legacy, the secretary's concerned eyes on her, even Daphne Snow felt the weight of helplessness pressing down on her. The secretary's words continued to ring in her ears as she gritted her teeth. With fierce determination, she forced herself to respond, "Wait for my news." Without another word, she turned and hurriedly left, her heart heavy with both uncertainty and defiance. She was walking away, but internally, she struggled with hesitation, torn between the need to act and the overwhelming fear of what lay ahead. Behind her, the secretary stood still, unsure of what to do next, as the weight of the crisis loomed over all of them. Daphne Snow sat in the car, arriving in front of the grand building shimmering with golden light, but it was truly blinding. At the moment of chasing stars, Victor Gale stepped out from inside. He wore a finely tailored black suit, with a white shirt featuring English stripes inside, showcasing his serious style. It fit perfectly, accentuating his perfect physique. On the outside was a simple yet exquisite wristwatch, reflecting his prestigious identity and exceptional taste, vividly alive. When he saw Daphne Snow, his thin lips slightly curled up, forming a gentle smile that captivated the heart, yet contained a profound coldness. He looked at her, silently waiting for her to take the initiative to approach. He took a deep breath, and then Daphne Snow spoke, "Can we talk?" "About what?" It was as if the events of last night had never happened. He remained as light as a breeze, not mentioning a single word. He clenched his jaw but then relaxed. "This place isn't very convenient, can we change to another location?" The words left Daphne Snow's lips like a reluctant compromise, but they failed to stir even a flicker of pity in Victor Gale. He merely curled his lips into a cold, dismissive smile, letting out a small huff. "Daphne Snow," he began. "Yesterday, I gave you a chance, but you didn't take it. How idle do you think I, Victor Gale, am?" With that, he walked past her, not granting her a single opportunity for redemption. Daphne Snow felt her throat tighten, emotions welling up. "I regret it now," she whispered. His footsteps halted briefly. He turned back to face her, a mocking smirk etched across his features. "So, you want to come back and beg me? Fine, let me torment you a little more." The cruel words cut through her. Daphne wanted nothing more than to slap him, to release her pent-up anger, but instead, she swallowed it all down. She lowered her head, the bitter tears in her eyes threatening to spill over. "I can't let the Stark family go bankrupt. My mother doesn't have money for her treatment, and my father is in prison. Please," she pleaded, her voice weak and exhausted. "Invest in the Stark family. Help my father." Her voice carried no strength, only desperation. Victor Gale curled his lips again, his gaze cold and detached. When begging, one should know their place. Daphne Snow stood frozen in shock, not expecting such heartless words. But Victor Gale had already turned away, walking out of her story, leaving her reeling in the aftermath. "What do you want?" she shouted, mustering her courage. She ran forward, trying to keep up, but the closer she got to him, the more distant he seemed, like an unreachable mountain, cloaked in mist. His voice softened, though still distant, "Be careful." "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice trembling with both fear and frustration. He turned and simply replied, "Please me." His tall, imposing figure stood firm before her, and Daphne felt as though the ground beneath her was slipping away. The meaning in his words was unmistakable, and it left her both shocked and bewildered. "You only have 3 seconds," he said, as if giving her a cruel ultimatum. She gasped, but no further words came. Victor Gale closed his eyes, waiting patiently. 3. He tilted his head slightly, his mind racing as emotions surged within him, crashing like waves against the walls of his heart. 2. His heart raced, pounding against his chest. 1. Suddenly, he opened his eyes, blinking in confusion. Petals began to fall around them like rain, and at the same time, tears streamed down Daphne Snow's face, as if in perfect harmony with the descending petals. She smiled, but it was a fragile, pained smile. As she stepped closer, her body stiffened with uncertainty, trying desperately to suppress the weight of her grievances. She rose up on her toes, her lips trembling, reaching out like petals blown by the wind. Victor Gale looked at her intently, his gaze unwavering. Her lips were just inches away, about to make contact, but at the last moment, they were stopped by his long fingers. She stared at him in confusion, her breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. "Come to the hospital in the evening, he said, his voice heavy with an unspoken depth. His gaze lingered on her, complex and inscrutable. After a moment of silence, he warned her again, his voice steady and unyielding, "Remember, I don't like waiting. Last night was an exception." "But why the hospital?" Daphne asked, her mind still reeling from the tension between them. Daphne Snow didn't understand. Her voice trembled as she asked, barely able to conceal her fear and confusion. She had no choice but to confront the situation head-on. Victor Gale simply laughed, a comfortable and easy sound, as though all of this was a mere game to him. Sitting in his limited space vehicle, he disappeared from view, leaving behind nothing but a pile of humiliation for Daphne Snow to carry alone. In the quiet hospital, within the patient room, a loud bang echoed as the door slammed shut. Victor Gale's footsteps approached, soft but full of power, each step making Daphne Snow, who was sitting on the hospital bed, tremble with unease. She panicked, jumping to her feet, even though she had spent so long preparing herself for this moment. Yet, no amount of preparation could stop the distress that filled her heart. Fear of the torment she knew was coming gnawed at her insides. Gazing at her with those cold eyes, Victor Gale wasted no time. "Did you want to leave, or stay here?" he asked flatly. She stammered, caught off guard. I'm not ready yet." He responded with a cold laugh, offering her no comfort, only furthering her dread. Turning to walk away, he raised his hand and motioned for her to follow. "Don't waste my time. The consequences are more than you can handle." The weight of his words hung in the air like a heavy stone, as though the very punch of honor itself gradually loosened under its oppressive force. She had no choice but to follow him, her steps heavy, as if burdened by the weight of hundreds of billions. At work, Daphne Snow never paused, and now, just as she reached out to open the door, Victor Gale seized her, his grip unyielding. With a swift motion, he pushed her firmly against the fragile door, trapping her in place. She lowered her head, unable to meet his gaze, and his nose came dangerously close to hers, the cold proximity almost suffocating. He could see the chill in her eyes, the hatred buried deep within her heart. The closer he drew, the more his breath brushed against her skin, dangerous and ice-cold. "Stop here. Don't do this," she pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. But his eyes remained like flames, cold and consuming. "If you don't want to do the work outside, I don't mind handling it," he said, his tone dripping with menace. "Perhaps we could visit the place where your mother lies." Her tears spilled over, her heart breaking under the weight of his cruel and ambiguous threats. Victor Gale laughed coldly, pointing through the glass at her mother's critical condition inside. "Your mother is still in there, clinging to life, while you're out here doing this. Doesn't it feel wonderful?" No. Daphne's heart pounded like thunder in her chest. "You've already crossed this line. Do you think you can turn back?" "Victor." Gale's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Why do you think I'm so cruel? Why am I forcing you to endure this humiliation?" Desperately, she struggled against his hold, wanting to break free from his fiery grip, but Victor Gale's strong arms only tightened around her, leaving her no room to escape. "Even when you're forced, aren't you also indulging me?" His blunt words made Daphne's face flush with an even deeper red. "Can you feel it?" he continued, his voice oozing sarcasm. "Suddenly, you've become so valuable. By pleasing a man, you can save the Stark family from financial ruin. You can ensure the best surgeons operate on your mother, that she gets the most comfortable hospital care, and that your father can live out his days in peace. Isn't that worth it?" His words, though spoken from a place of intimacy, were laced with mockery. The scene should have been one of passion, but his tone was filled with cruelty and his voice dripped with danger. It took Daphne a long time to regain her composure. In her tear-filled eyes, emotions swirled, fear, doubt, and something deeper, hidden beneath the surface. "Victor Gale," she began, her voice barely steady, "you set conditions for me to be with you. But I don't think it's because you're attracted to me, is it? There must be another reason, something more. Isn't that right? Her gaze met his. What do you think? We've known each other before, haven't we? Everything was happening so fast, too quickly for her to make sense of it all. Victor Gale smirked, his expression dark and inscrutable. Whether we knew each other before or not, it doesn't matter, he replied coldly. What matters is from now on. I'll get to know you intimately. Very intimately. He smiled as he said this, the hint of danger and ambiguity in his voice sending a shiver down Daphne's spine. There was no denying it, she was trapped in a web she didn't know how to escape. Daphne Snow felt her cheeks flush with heat. His dangerous breath seemed to choke her, trapping her heart in her throat. Victor Gale curled his lips into a cold, meaningful smile, the kind that sent shivers down her spine. Don't. She stammered, her eyes turning slightly red with panic. Don't do this here. Let's go to a hotel, anywhere else, just not here. He let out a low, mocking laugh. Little girl, it's too late. With a swift movement, Victor Gale lifted Daphne Snow, pinning her down on the sofa. The game had begun, and he saw no reason to stop halfway. Moments later, after adjusting his clothes, Victor Gale crossed his arms over his chest, looking at her with an unsettling mix of interest and disdain. Curling his lips, he spoke coldly, like a warning, but his words also clearly stated, I, Victor Gale, have a cleanliness obsession. From now on, you will be my personal toy. Keep your distance from other men. In his eyes, she was nothing more than an object, a commodity for his amusement. Daphne Snow didn't respond. She knew that by taking this step, she had already allowed her honor to be trampled beneath his feet. She curled up on the sofa, her heart aching with an unbearable pain. Victor Gale turned his back on her and walked away. Behind him, Daphne tried to pull the corners of her mouth into a semblance of a smile, but all that came out was a fragmented sound, as though she had exhausted all her strength. What about the promise you made to me? She asked weakly. His cold voice drifted back to her. Once the deal is made, I will fulfill it. He paused for a moment, turning slightly to look at her, but his expression remained as cold as ever. I hope next time, you won't act like a dead fish. Daphne Snow felt a chill run through her body as his words sank in. She looked up at him, her vigilant eyes filled with a mixture of fear and disgust. What do you want? She asked, her voice trembling. Victor Gale was not angry. Instead, he smiled, but it was a smile devoid of warmth. Your father's company needs a large sum of money to revive, he said smoothly. Do you think one time is enough to satisfy me? Her heart sank as his words hung in the air. So, what do you want? She whispered, dread pooling in her stomach. He stepped closer, lifting her chin with a cruel hand. Daphne Snow, you are not valuable enough yet, he said, each word delivered lightly, as though they meant nothing to him, but to her, they felt like sharp needles piercing her heart. Daphne looked at him, her already pale face becoming even more ashen. After a long pause, she finally spoke, how long will this last? He smiled faintly, an expression that chilled her to the core. Until I get bored. Her heart sank further into a deep abyss, one she knew she couldn't escape. As he moved to open the door, her voice rang out once more, I don't know who you hate more, is it me, my father, or the entire Stark family? She hesitated, her voice trembling with confusion and pain. But if you hate us so much, why don't you just put my father in prison or completely destroy the Stark family? Victor Gale turned to her, his expression cold and emotionless. If I truly hated someone, doing it that way wouldn't be enough to satisfy my revenge. Her hand still gripped the doorknob tightly, her knuckles white with tension. His voice, low and slow, echoed through the room like a sentence from hell. I prefer slow torture, just like what happened earlier. Her fingertips turned pale as she clung to the sofa for support, her body trembling from the weight of his words. Is that so? She whispered, her voice filled with despair. Her reaction didn't surprise him. He offered no further explanation, only a mocking smirk that seemed to ridicule her weakness. It was a cruel satire, a woman lying unconscious on a hospital bed while her beloved daughter suffered humiliation and torment outside. Without another glance, Victor Gale turned and left the room, indifferent and ruthless. His retreating figure was cold and heartless, leaving behind nothing but icy silence. Suddenly, the hospital door slammed shut with a loud thud, echoing in the empty space. Daphne Snow sat there, her heart in turmoil, waves of pain crashing over her, an indescribable discomfort taking root in her chest. She didn't know how long she had been sitting in that same position, her body still, her face pale as if drained of life. It wasn't until a nurse entered the room that Daphne stirred. The nurse, seeing her in tattered clothes, her hair disheveled, and her face ghostly white, was startled. "Miss, are you all right?" the nurse asked, her voice filled with concern. Daphne Snow shook her head slowly, adjusting her clothes slightly. When the nurse stepped into the inner room to check on her mother, Daphne held back her swirling emotions and finally mustered the strength to ask, "How is my mother?" The nurse glanced at her, then replied carefully, "We need to arrange surgery immediately, otherwise, her condition will only worsen. She cannot endure the pain of her illness much longer." After a brief hesitation, the nurse added, "Are you really okay, miss?" Daphne Snow quickly replied, panicking, "I'm fine." When the nurse left, Daphne rushed to her mother's bedside. Serena Grace lay there, pale and fragile, her face showing signs of the illness that had worn her down. Daphne didn't dare stay too long, her heart filled with fear. She was afraid that if her mother woke up, she would see the miserable state her daughter was in. Returning to her apartment, Daphne frantically turned on the water, scrubbing herself over and over, trying to wash away the lingering scent of Victor Gale. But the more she scrubbed, the more painful it felt, like the water itself was reminding her of the humiliation she couldn't wash away. With every rinse, her heart grew number, and the discomfort in her soul deepened. After what seemed like an eternity, she finally stepped out of the bathroom. Her phone vibrated with a missed call notification, followed by a message. The call was from Ernest Stark's secretary. Daphne immediately called back. The secretary, sounding excited, informed Daphne that the Starkworth Company was about to receive investment. "Ernest Stark will soon be released," the secretary said enthusiastically, "and the chairman will not be replaced. Everything is falling back into place, Stoneworks is about to be saved." Daphne barely responded, knowing full well what this meant, it was all because of Victor Gale. She simply hung up the phone, feeling empty. Shortly afterward, she noticed the message was from Victor Gale's assistant, detailing Victor Gale's address and requesting that she move there tonight. The message even made it clear that Daphne was expected to live there permanently. Without hesitation, Daphne deleted the message. It was already late when she returned from the hospital. Exhausted from caring for her mother, she had completely forgotten about Victor Gale's villa. After a long, hot shower, she collapsed into bed and fell into a deep sleep. But her rest was soon interrupted by a nightmare, and she awoke, startled, just as her phone began ringing. It was a call from Ernest Stark. Daphne panicked as she answered, sensing something was wrong. "Dad, what's happening? Wasn't there supposed to be an investment in Starkworth?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. Her father's voice was filled with despair. "Initially, yes, there was talk of an investment. They even sent people to negotiate. But just now, I received a call saying they've decided to pull out. Without that investment, there's no way for us to survive this crisis." Daphne felt her heart sink as her father sighed heavily on the other end. "What happened?" she asked, but Ernest Stark had no answer. After offering a few hollow reassurances, she hung up the phone. Fury surged within her, and without thinking, she called Victor Gale. "Victor Gale," she snapped, "why did you suddenly withdraw the funds from Starkworth? What does this mean?" On the other end, Victor Gale merely smiled. "Last night," he said smoothly, "it seems you forgot to go somewhere." Daphne's mind raced as she realized the truth. "So, this is your way of showing me the consequences of going against your wishes? Otherwise, what did you expect?" Victor replied coolly, his voice leaving no room for debate. He glanced at the clock. "It's 8 o'clock now," he said coldly. "You have 2 hours until 10 o'clock. If you leave now, you'll still have a little time to reconsider your decisions before my meeting at the company." Before Daphne could respond, the call ended abruptly with a beep, leaving her staring at her phone in stunned silence. The harsh reality hit her as she rushed to the address. By the time she arrived, it was 8:50. Victor Gale stood by the window, watching her every step as she walked in, each movement filled with reluctance. He smiled, clearly satisfied by her compliance. When she reached the bedroom on the second floor, Daphne Snow stood at the door, her hand raised to knock but frozen in hesitation. "Come in," came the cold voice from inside the room. His words were like stones weighing down on her chest, as if he had known she was there, hesitating outside the door all along. His commanding tone left no room for disobedience. Her lips sealed tight, she swallowed the tension building inside her. Slowly, she pushed the door open and stepped inside, her gaze landing on the tall figure of Victor Gale, who stood like a skilled swordsman, poised, powerful, and waiting. Thus, the long and cold night brings an invisible pressure to people. Daphne Snow felt her heart restless, growing increasingly uneasy. Recalling the scene from yesterday at the hospital, the painful feeling below still lingered deeply in her mind. Looking carefully at the shape of the woman, Victor Gale smirked, his deep and serious voice resonating in the air. With an impatient tone, Daphne Snow suddenly felt her heart tighten, biting her lip. Victor Gale stepped forward, moving very slowly, as if he had run out of patience. He forcefully pulled the woman closer, then pinned her against the glass window. On the cold glass, a dangerous voice emerged. "So slow, don't you know you don't have much time to please me, to change my mind? Threatening a woman in this way is your style." He tightened his grip on her body with great force, to the point where she found it a bit hard to breathe, causing the anger within her to surge suddenly. "Victor Gale, you are truly shameless." Daphne Snow gritted her teeth, her fair chin showing painful red marks, looking both striking and ruthless. "Bone. Remember that this shamelessness will cling to you like a shadow, tormenting and destroying you, leaving you a mere shell of your former self." Her face was as white as paper, her voice trembling in her throat. "Of course, this torment is a choice you can make. You can say no, but that's not the only consequence. You need to consider for yourself whether you can endure it." Victor Gale gave a slight smile at the corner of his thin lips. He patted her head. "If you choose to endure, then when the transaction is established, you should understand how to fulfill this obligation. If not," he intentionally paused, his deep gaze trailing along her delicate features, slowly resting on her seductive collarbone. The light in Victor Gale's eyes darkened as he spoke, his voice low and menacing. "If not, you will ruin everything." His gaze, cold and piercing, sent a shiver down Daphne Snow's spine, leaving her feeling more vulnerable than ever. The stark reality settled in, the Stark family was falling apart, her father was on the run, and everything was crumbling around her. In the chilly atmosphere of the room, an overwhelming sense of despair washed over her. Victor Gale smiled coldly, his expression unreadable yet chilling. "If you were to watch your loved ones, one by one, drift away, what would you do?" he asked, his voice taunting her fragile emotions. Daphne Snow's small face paled, the weight of his words sinking in. Her father had been sentenced, imprisoned, and her mother was left without the money for necessary treatment. Every burden, every consequence now rested on her shoulders, too heavy for her to carry alone. Instinctively, her body shrank back in fear. Seeing her crumble, Victor Gale's alluring lips curled into a satisfied smile. "So," he continued, "will you stand by your choice from yesterday? Or will you turn back now? Daphne stared at him, her mind swirling with fear and confusion. Her voice, weak and trembling, barely managed to escape her lips. I promise you, she whispered, her eyes wide and filled with terror. Victor Gale's smirk deepened, a dark gleam in his eyes. Very good, he said, his voice resonating deeply, rich with satisfaction. He leaned closer, his breath warm and heavy against her face, his presence suffocating yet captivating. You've made a clever choice, he murmured, his beautiful lips descending toward hers. He kissed her, his lips brushing against her petal-soft ones. But as he attempted to deepen the kiss, Daphne's instincts took over. With a sudden surge of resistance, she bit down hard on his lip, refusing to let go, her defiance surfacing in that single act of rebellion. Victor Gale chuckled coldly, pulling back slightly, the icy sound of his laughter echoing in the room. Victor Gale roughly placed his hand on Daphne Snow's face, forcing her delicate features to turn towards him, his gaze solely on her. Be my woman, you must learn to obey. Even if it's just pretending, you must pretend professionally, only then will you be loved. After saying this, he patted her head as if he were dealing with a pet. She felt her heart shatter. Daphne Snow didn't know how much time had passed when Victor Gale withdrew. Her soft body collapsed on the ground like a doll, pale and lifeless. When he stepped out of the bathroom, she was still lying on the carpet, as if dead. His cold voice rang out, carrying a commanding tone, you need to bathe properly. To his words, Daphne Snow seemed not to hear, her body and soul both dejectedly lying there. Her long legs, after bathing, still dripped with clear droplets, highlighting her alluring and powerful figure. Victor Gale stepped beside her, bending slightly as his cold hand gently grasped Daphne Snow's flushed chin. His voice dripped with sarcasm as he said, if you want to do it again. Her body suddenly trembled, but she didn't respond to him. Pain had become the only thing that made her feel alive. Trembling, she rose from the ground. I'm going to take a shower. Lying in the bathtub, her mind was empty, devoid of thoughts. The cold, detached voice of Victor Gale came from outside, as if he could read her mind. You only have 10 minutes. And now, there are only 3 minutes left. Panicked, Daphne grabbed the soap, washing herself quickly. She emerged barefoot from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, and saw him sitting on the sofa, waiting. Come sit here, he said, smiling faintly. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and though she hesitated, Daphne Snow obeyed, walking slowly toward him. She lowered her eyes, intending to sit beside him, but then she noticed him pointing to his lap. She froze. His handsome brows furrowed, and he ordered her again, sit here. She stood there, hesitating, but after a long pause, she took a deep breath and carefully sat on his lap, feeling the weight of her decision. The white towel wrapped tightly around her was the only barrier between her skin and his. The moment she sat down, she could feel the warmth of his skin pressed against hers, an uncomfortable sensation that made her heart race. Still, she sat there in silence, sitting on Victor Gale's lap, her body cold with discomfort. Before she could make a move to get up, he wrapped his arms around her slender waist, pulling her closer. His long, cold fingers traced the smooth curve of her back, slowly gliding over her fair skin. Ah, she gasped, trying to escape his grip, her voice trembling with desperation. I'm very tired, she pleaded, her words barely above a whisper. Her back pressed tightly against his chest, she could feel his firm body and the steady beat of his heart. It was strong, unyielding, and overwhelming. After I go to the company, I'll come back to you, he said in a low voice, moving even closer. His cold fingers continued their slow torment. Since yesterday, whenever you resist, whenever you struggle, you only make things worse for yourself. You make me even more relentless. He smirked as he finished, spreading his arms. Help me put on my clothes. Daphne Snow hesitated for a moment before going to the wardrobe, where several outfits were neatly arranged. She looked back at him, her voice small as she asked, "What do you want to wear?" He stared at her for a moment, his gaze piercing, before replying, "What do you think?" She bit her lip and picked out a light-colored shirt and a silver suit. Victor Gale didn't offer any opinion, treating her choice as though it were acceptable. With trembling hands, she obediently helped him get dressed. As she knelt down to help him with his pants, he didn't cooperate by lifting his leg, making the task even more humiliating. Tears welled up in Daphne's eyes, falling silently as she struggled to lift one of his legs. The frustration and shame burned inside her, but she gritted her teeth, continuing the humiliating task. Once she had managed to pull the pant legs up, Victor Gale stood up, a cold smile playing on his lips. He watched her intently as he zipped up his pants, buttoning his shirt, and began fastening his belt. The weight of the belt made the task harder, but Daphne kept her head down, pressing it into place as her emotions boiled beneath the surface. Daphne Snow struggled as she attempted to fasten the other end of the belt, her movements hesitant. Suddenly, she was stopped, and in that brief pause, she understood his intention. She resumed fastening it, but as her hand began to withdraw, Victor Gale grabbed it firmly, pressing it back down to where he wanted it. Startled, Daphne froze as he bent down, his lips close to her ear, whispering with a cold affection, "In the future, these little hands will serve me here. They need to be as flexible as when fastening my belt." Shocked, Daphne quickly pulled her hand away, her face pale with a mixture of fear and disgust. Victor Gale remained indifferent, allowing her to withdraw without resistance. "Once you've moved here, just wait for me. Don't make me feel like you're disobeying me or doing something I won't tolerate. Do you understand?" His voice dripped with a blatant threat. A bitter smile tugged at her lips, and she responded weakly, "Uh-huh." Fearing he hadn't heard her or would take offense, she quickly cleared her throat and added, "I understand." With a cold smile, Victor Gale turned and left the room, leaving Daphne standing in silent turmoil. Time passed slowly, and after what seemed like an eternity, a knock on the door echoed through the villa. It was the butler's voice. "Miss Snow, hello. I'm Butler Gray Thomas." "You can call me Butler Thomas," the man introduced himself politely. Daphne offered a faint, exhausted smile. Her voice came out weakly, "Did Victor Gale send you to urge me to pack my things and return?" The butler frowned slightly but refrained from offering an explanation. Instead, he asked sincerely, "Miss Snow, when do you plan to return and tidy up? I can arrange a car for you." "I already know," Daphne interrupted, her tone sharp. "I'll be leaving soon." "All right," Butler Thomas replied before walking outside. As soon as he left, Daphne quickly tidied up her surroundings and headed to her apartment. She packed her belongings in a hurry, barely giving herself time to process what was happening. "Butler Thomas, please move my things to the villa first. I want to visit my mother for a bit," Daphne instructed. The butler hesitated before responding, "Perhaps you should consult with him first." Daphne's expression darkened. What does he mean by that? Is he trying to control my freedom? Her anger simmered, but eventually, she forced herself to calm down and dialed Victor Gale. "What's the matter?" His voice was cold and impatient. "You can't treat me like this, Victor Gale." Daphne's voice cracked as she spoke, a mixture of frustration and pleading. "I want to visit my mother in the hospital." His response was sharp and uncompromising. "If you want to see your father sent straight to jail, then, by all means, try." The harshness of his tone made her throat tighten painfully, the words she wanted to say lodged deep inside her. Her heart ached with the weight of his control. "Return to the villa," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Don't make me repeat myself." Victor Gale interrupted Daphne Snow, his cold voice cutting through the tension. "You know," he began, "I don't have much patience. We don't know each other well, and you should be able to tell by now if you have the patience for this. What qualifications do you even have to understand me?" His words hung heavily in the air. Therefore, he continued, you need to learn to understand. The meaning behind his threat deepened, and Daphne Snow could feel the danger spreading. Only when you truly understand what your benefactor likes, dislikes, and how to manage their temperament, learning to be humble but strong, will you find yourself more at ease. Daphne bit her lip tightly, knowing she had no other option but to yield. Yet, she still tried to probe the situation. What about my mother's surgery? She asked, her voice trembling with hope. Arrange the surgery this afternoon, he replied, clearly out of patience. Daphne Snow, you'd better listen carefully. Don't push me. Can I go to the hospital this afternoon? She asked, a faint glimmer of hope flickering despite the coldness in her tone. To Victor Gale, her question wasn't irritating, it was amusing. This afternoon, a car will pick you up, but it's not going to the hospital. Where to? She asked, her confusion growing. You don't have the right to ask, Daphne Snow. You can only comply. Before she could respond, the call disconnected. The sound echoed in her ears, and with it, the fragile hope she held on to shattered, falling like broken glass at her feet. Obediently, Daphne returned to the villa. That afternoon, she got into the car Victor Gale sent. The address wasn't a hospital, it was a high-end department store. The staff greeted her warmly and led her to try on countless clothes. Meanwhile, Victor made himself comfortable in the lounge area, casually flipping through a magazine without once looking her way. Outfit after outfit, she stood in front of him, but his answer remained the same each time, white. After what felt like hours, Daphne finally protested, her voice faint with frustration. This is already the 30th outfit, she said, her exhaustion clear. So what? He asked, his voice slightly hoarse as he raised his eyes to meet hers. I don't want to try anymore, she replied, biting back her fatigue. Keep going, he ordered, his tone cold and final, leaving no room for argument. His sharp gaze and commanding aura made the staff around them cautious. One of them stepped forward, speaking softly, perhaps Miss Snow should try on a few more outfits. Biting her lip in silence, Daphne conceded, her will broken for the moment. Fine. Please, this way, the staff member said, guiding her back to the fitting room. Pointing to a couple of outfits, Daphne sighed. Just these two. The staff shook their heads again, clearly displeased with her choices. The shop assistant opened her mouth and said, Daphne Snow, I believe Victor Gale definitely doesn't want you to only try on 2 outfits. She handed Daphne an additional 5 or 6 more outfits and added, here, try these on as well. I think Victor Gale might like them. In the fitting room, Daphne mechanically tried on the clothes, her mind numb from the task. Meanwhile, in the lounge, Victor Gale waved his hand, summoning a shop assistant. What can I do for you, Victor Gale? The assistant asked eagerly. Wrap up whatever she likes. Yes, Victor Gale, the assistant responded happily, and immediately made her way back to the fitting room. Daphne Snow, pick whatever you like, and we'll wrap it up for you, she said, smiling. Daphne glanced at the shop assistant, her expression distant. What if I don't like any of them? She asked, her tone clipped. The shop assistant smiled politely, as though anticipating the question. Just choose a little. Victor Gale will like it. A spark of frustration ignited in Daphne's chest. Isn't it supposed to be about what I like? She asked, her voice edged with irritation. The shop assistant, ever professional, responded smoothly. Whether you like it or not isn't important. What matters is that you choose a few more outfits. I'm sure Victor Gale will be happy. Seeing Daphne's resolve begin to weaken, the assistant continued, Daphne Snow, you're so beautiful, and you have an amazing figure. No matter what outfit you wear, you'll look stunning. Surely, Victor Gale will feel comfortable, too. And if Victor Gale is happy, then your days will be more pleasant, right? The tight press of Daphne's lips relaxed ever so slightly. She sighed, resigned to the situation. If it makes him happy, and if he's so generous, then you ladies can sell as many outfits as you like. The assistant smiled warmly. That's the spirit. In the lounge, Victor Gale's gaze swept over her, their eyes locking for a brief moment. Daphne trembled slightly, squeezing her eyes shut in frustration. Victor stood up, and the shop staff immediately turned their attention to him, waiting for instructions. Wrap up all the outfits she tried on, he commanded coldly. The staff, thrilled at the sale, respectfully packed up the clothes. Victor Gale glanced at Daphne with a frigid expression, then made his way toward the shoe store. Daphne followed like a lost, powerless doll, unable to assert herself. The two of them continued to the jewelry store, where Victor swiped his golden card without a second thought, spending several million as though it were nothing. His generosity was indeed astounding. Daphne watched it all with growing bitterness. Victor Gale, are you this generous with all your lovers? She asked coldly, her voice filled with thinly veiled disdain. From clothes, shoes, bags, to jewelry. Should I feel honored to have such a generous owner like you? Victor Gale narrowed his eyes, amused by her sharpness. If you think that way, then sure, he replied coolly. He picked up an exquisite bracelet and slipped it onto her delicate wrist. Indeed, he said, his voice soft but commanding. This style suits you perfectly. Daphne stared at the bracelet, the dazzling light reflecting off it almost blinding her. The expensive piece of jewelry felt like a heavy reminder of her entrapment. Victor Gale observed her closely, his expression shifting to one of displeasure. Surely this makes you proud, right? He said mockingly, his voice laced with sarcasm. He watched her reaction, knowing the truth behind her situation. Her mother was lying in a hospital, undergoing surgery, her life hanging by a thread. And here she was, shopping in luxury, unable to be by her mother's side. It was a twisted irony. His cold fingers gently grazed her slender shoulder, slowly moving down to touch the bracelet, savoring the moment as if relishing her discomfort. However, his next words dripped with cruelty. So, do you feel comfortable? He asked, as though daring her to respond. Suddenly, a sharp, clear sound echoed in the store. The bracelet had slipped from Daphne's wrist and fell to the ground with a clatter. Daphne Snow suddenly yanked her hand back, stepping several paces away from Victor Gale. Was he doing all of this on purpose? His eyes narrowed, the smile on his lips a mockery of her foolishness. If he already knew the answer, why even ask? Did Daphne truly understand? This man had purposely chosen this afternoon to drag her shopping, intentionally preventing her from being with her mother, Serena Grace, during her surgery. Yet, even knowing this, she had still voiced her question out loud. His cruel mockery echoed in her mind. It wasn't enough that he had taken control of her body, did he truly want to break her spirit as well? Her wrists pressed down on the table, struggling to support her body, which was on the verge of collapsing. How much do you hate me? She muttered to herself, overwhelmed by how far he was willing to go. The beautiful bracelet, which once adorned her wrist, lay discarded on the ground. Don't you think it's wasteful? She whispered bitterly, feeling his gaze fix on her as her pain and frustration only seemed to amuse him. His smile faded slowly, replaced by a dangerous curve at the corners of his eyes. He glanced at the sparkling bracelet on the floor and commanded coldly, pick it up. Daphne Snow stood for a moment, her mind racing. Without thinking further, she quickly turned and rushed towards the door, her only thought to see her mother. After enduring the torment of the afternoon, her patience had worn thin. She was desperate to check on Serena Grace. But just as her foot hovered at the threshold, Victor Gale's voice sliced through the air behind her, going outside means our transaction is over. Her heart clenched, and she froze. Slowly, she stepped back, realizing the gravity of the situation. She had already used her chance twice. There wouldn't be a third. His ghostly words spilled out, chilling her to the bone. You've made your choice. The coldness in his voice wrapped around her trembling heart, squeezing it tightly, torturing her into submission. Her heart seemed to stop under the suffocating pressure, but through her pain, a desperate strength was reborn. Her fingers clenched into tight fists, the sharp nails digging into her skin, cutting into her flesh as if to carve out the unbearable pain. She knew she had no choice but to turn back. Each step she took was agonizingly difficult, like walking through quicksand. Tears welled in her eyes, shimmering like glass as she glanced at the ground. There, the bracelet lay, a symbol of everything she had lost. Her tears fell silently, cold as ice, lacking any warmth. Her trembling fingers touched the dazzling bracelet, and with a heavy heart, she reluctantly picked it up from the floor. Victor Gale approached, smiling gently, clearly pleased with her submission. He took the bracelet from her hand, toying with it for what seemed like an eternity before slipping it back onto her wrist. "This bracelet suits you very well," he remarked with satisfaction, lifting her hand into the light. He leaned down and gently kissed the back of her hand, as if it were a part of his cruel ritual. "Isn't it beautiful?" "What do you think?" he asked, his voice soft but cold. She didn't respond immediately. Their eyes met, and in the silence, time seemed to stretch on forever. Her lips trembled slightly, and the strength she had been trying to hold on to slipped away. Finally, she nodded, her voice trembling with sorrow. "Beautiful," she whispered, her tone aching. "Very beautiful." "If it's beautiful," he said with an air of finality, "then you must wear it every day from now on. Don't take it off, okay?" He didn't care about how she felt, about her inner turmoil or the pain behind her words. He simply reveled in the power of control, enjoying the pleasure of domination that came from watching her submit to his will. The heartbreaking story because of his sparkling words, her heart was severely wounded, shattered on the ground. Even if she didn't like it, she had to endure, she would be as he wished, obediently suffering. Victor Gale, whether stubborn or yielding, did not refute, he simply answered as he desired. Victor Gale once again looked at Daphne Snow, his gaze unclear, displaying emotions so complex they were indescribable. Just a moment later, he smiled, a smile that sent chills down one's spine. A soft sound escaped his lips, making it easy to rearrange your place. "The good girl listens." Is this not exactly what Victor Gale wanted? The bitter traces still lingered on her lips. Daphne Snow's voice was very low, so low that it lost all its spirit. Yet, this still couldn't soften him. "What did you just call me?" he asked slowly, his smile full of teaching. "I think, instead of calling me Victor Gale, you should call me Sugar Daddy, that would be more appropriate." Daphne Snow shivered slightly, biting her lip in silence. Then, all the jewelry was carefully wrapped up under the attentive service of the staff and brought outside for the two. He walked away gently, leaving behind a cold, delicate silhouette. Victor Gale brought her back, escorted by the black-clad guards who received orders. After Victor Gale disappeared, they gestured for Daphne Snow. "Miss, please get in the car." She smiled wryly. Upon returning to the villa, butler Gray Thomas was already waiting there. Upon seeing Daphne Snow, he spoke. "Miss, the young master called to say he will return after dinner." "I know," Daphne Snow replied, feeling a bit unsteady, unsure of how her mother was doing after the surgery. For a moment, she recalled what the shop assistant had just said, as if she had come to some realization. When night fell, Daphne Snow had changed into a silk pajama set before Victor Gale returned. She sat in front of the mirror, applying light makeup. When Victor Gale came back, he saw Daphne Snow sitting on the rattan chair on the balcony, intently gazing at the garden surrounding the villa, her expression fully focused. That concentration exuded a strange beauty, so quiet and serene. A cat meowed. Instantly, he walked over and sat next to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "It's so quiet, what are you thinking about?" "Oh." Suddenly interrupted, Daphne Snow was startled. Feeling a bit uncomfortable, she wanted to keep her distance from Victor Gale. Don't touch. He spoke up, instinctively looking toward Daphne Snow. The sheer nightgown she wore made her skin appear noticeably darker. It wasn't bad to pretend to be filial, she looked quite comfortable. As their skin brushed against each other, Daphne Snow glanced at him. The scent of his cologne was quite pleasant. His hot breath brushed against her soft skin, as if he were intoxicated by her scent. Daphne Snow looked up at him, her eyes filled with caution. Do you like it? Victor Gale was taken aback, she wanted to please him. He tightened his grip on her hand. Compared to her prickly demeanor during the day, he certainly preferred her being obedient in front of him. Although he found his words somewhat contemptuous, Daphne Snow didn't dwell on it too much. Instead, she cautiously said, I want to ask you for a favor. She simply wanted to express, I just want to discuss conditions with you. Victor Gale smiled slightly, the corners of his mouth curling up, then teased, to negotiate conditions, this isn't enough. With a hint of tears welling in her eyes, Daphne Snow said softly, I just want to visit my mother. Her surgery was very successful. It's precisely because she just had surgery that I want to see her. Daphne Snow looked at him without blinking. I am not at ease. Compared to his previously pleasant demeanor, his expression had become solemn. What's wrong? Have you been so eager to leave? You've misunderstood, Daphne Snow. Have you not realized your situation right now? Since you entered this mansion, Miss Snow, you should know what to think and what not to think. I don't have many other thoughts. I know my current status, lowly, you can trample me at will. That is for the best. After saying this, Daphne Snow began to cry. Victor Gale remained cold, his gaze briefly shifting due to her contemptible words. Yet his lips still produced a cruel sound. If you know, then that is for the best. Daphne Snow took a few breaths. I just want to see my mother for a bit, just a bit. Do you really have to confront me? Victor Gale seemed to be angry, his voice suddenly rising a few notches. Daphne Snow was startled. Daphne Snow was supposed to be by Serena Grace's side during her surgery. Although Victor Gale knew this very well, he deliberately prevented Daphne Snow from being next to Serena Grace just to see her discomfort. She still tried to speak to him, then begged without any self-respect left. All right, if you want it that way, I will let you go. But before his words were finished, he suddenly forcefully spread her legs apart, making her sit on his lap. What are you doing? Daphne Snow exclaimed in panic. Performing the duty you should have. After the storm, he left her body. Just that, despite their previous intimate position, his gaze at her now was still filled with desire. Daphne Snow no longer had the strength to guess how much he hated her. She lowered her eyes, her long eyelashes trembling weakly. Regarding her haggard and painful appearance, Victor Gale seemed unconcerned. On the contrary, he smiled coldly, pulling her trembling small body from the bed and pressing it against his firm chest. Behave, serve me a bath. Without knowing when, tears had fallen from the corners of her eyes. Watching the silhouette of the man walk into the bathroom, Daphne Snow finally lifted herself up. Daphne Snow carefully scooped warm water, clumsily serving. It was unclear whether the condensation of steam turned into droplets running down her cheek, or if it was because she felt a sense of humiliation that tears kept flowing. At this moment, her face was covered with drops of water. Stop your pathetic tears. The cold voice of Victor Gale echoed, carrying a distinct displeasure. Daphne Snow bit her lip, trying to endure. She took off her bathrobe and slipped inside. He commanded her with an unmistakable tone. She hesitated for a moment, and then the sound of the robe dropping to the floor rang out. Her fair skin was exposed to the air, emanating a chill upon contact. Daphne Snow gently closed her eyes, then stepped in, embraced by him in the warm water. Her heart raced, and the silver ring seemed to overflow with stories. Soon enough, everything would fall into place. Will my performance satisfy you? His hand lightly glided over her arm, causing Daphne Snow to shiver. She opened her eyes. I want to go to Jade Stone. His large hand rested on her slender chin, gently molding it. You don't need to go out to work. I, Victor Gale, can still support you. One statement shattered the freedom she longed for. Do you want to keep me locked up like this forever? Although it was a question full of anger, because of the previous lessons, Daphne Snow's voice had now diminished by 3 parts. He did not mock coldly, his deep gaze swept across her beautiful face. A light mist gently kissed her shining forehead. Her long eyelashes trembled slightly due to the suppressed anger. Below her nose were soft lips like flower petals, radiating a gentle beauty, only that a row of teeth marks marred that beauty. He rescued her lips caught between her teeth and then kissed them lightly, telling her not to bite anymore. If she ruined them, they would lose their value. She raised her head, asking in his eyes, Am I still valuable? He coldly opened his mouth, You should know your place. She smiled self-deprecatingly, huffed, Don't worry, I will manage. Then that's best. He slightly curled his lips in disdain and closed his eyes to rest. When he stood up from the bathtub, Victor Gale quickly wrapped a towel around himself, then took a towel and stood in front of her. I'll help you. Daphne Snow glanced at Victor Gale, her lips moved slightly but ultimately said nothing. He reached out, carefully wrapping the towel around her, then asked, Are you tired? She was about to open her mouth to say she was tired, but after thinking it over, she just shook her head, Not tired. He smiled contentedly, truly liking this answer. Following Victor Gale into the bedroom, she pulled the blanket aside and sat on the bed. Daphne Snow secretly thought it a bit silly, then went barefoot onto the bed. She cleverly leaned against him. Victor Gale did not push Daphne Snow away, looking at the petite girl in his arms, asking why she was so obedient. Because you like me this way. Closing her eyes, Daphne Snow could only feel her eyelashes fluttering, her eyes brimming with tears but trying hard not to let them fall, merely displaying a relaxed exterior. Victor Gale was silent for a moment before turning off the lights. For some reason, seeing the woman's appearance, he suddenly felt annoyed. Immediately afterward, he pushed Daphne Snow away, turned over, and coldly turned his back to her. Daphne Snow seemed oblivious to the man's unusual behavior, she wrapped her arms around him from behind and leaned close. The soft sensation from his back reached her. Victor Gale paused for a moment, then suddenly turned over and coldly mocked her. Daphne Snow, I truly underestimated you. In the darkness, Daphne Snow neither opened her eyes nor said a word. This is silence. A cold finger suddenly touched her chin, forcing her to lift her head. How is it that in just a few days, you've learned to please men so quickly? If you don't like my obedient version, I can change in another way. Her tear-filled eyes still remained shut. Her trembling lips uttered words of concession. His dark eyes narrowed dangerously, leaving only a slim slit. He stared at her, looking without end. The spiky hedgehog has now become as docile as a little rabbit. In the end, he did not get angry but coldly tilted her chin. Her sensitive lips no longer spoke but heavily slammed the door shut. The sound of footsteps gradually faded away. The tears finally fell, streaming endlessly, wetting one corner of the pillow. Nightmares followed like shadows, lingering all night long. The next morning, sunlight streamed in as Daphne Snow finished bathing. At that moment, Victor Gale arrived just in time. Seeing Daphne Snow, he respectfully greeted her, Good morning, Miss Snow. Daphne Snow gaze unconsciously swept over. Trung seemed to understand and immediately opened his mouth to say, The young master has already had his meal downstairs. The young lady can go down now. Last night, Victor Gale had left, and Daphne Snow thought he had left the villa, not realizing he was having a meal. Daphne Snow went downstairs and sat down, but she had no mood to eat. The pain and fatigue from recent days had always followed her, and the fact that she couldn't see Serena Grace made her mood even more irritable. She silently picked up a glass of milk, took a small sip, feeling absent-minded. Victor Gale frowned and coldly said, "Finish your milk, I don't want to see any waste." Daphne Snow came to her senses and obediently finished the glass of milk. She glanced at her plate of food and saw that the fried egg was still intact. He ordered again, "Eat the egg." Daphne Snow looked at the plate of eggs and bowed her head to eat it all under his gaze. After that, he watched her eat a piece of toast before standing up. Trung saw that Victor Gale was about to go out to the company and brought him his coat and tie. Victor Gale just glanced at them and then looked at Daphne Snow, "Tie my tie." He casually ordered her to do this and that. Daphne Snow and Victor Gale. Does Victor Gale see Daphne Snow as a servant? Daphne Snow didn't want to, but when she saw his stern gaze and felt she couldn't resist, she still stood up from her seat, but only stood beside him without making a move. "If you want to waste time like this, then just stand there stiffly," he mocked, seemingly knowing she wouldn't dare to continue resisting. Her lips pressed together lightly. Daphne Snow didn't dare to delay any longer. She silently took the tie from the butler's hand and carefully tied it for him. She glanced at the suit in the butler's hands. Victor Gale asked, "Did you wear this yourself, or?" His cold gaze spread around her lips. "You tell me." The response was the same as yesterday. Daphne Snow took the jacket, not knowing if it was because of nervousness or impatience. Her sleeve couldn't seem to fit into his arm. She hesitated for a moment, looked up at him, her eyes flashing with a pitiful expression. When Victor Gale saw that he had put his hand in, Daphne Snow hurriedly helped him button it up. As the suit was neatly draped over him, Victor Gale glanced at Daphne Snow. He smirked, "You did quite well today, I'll reward you with something. You can go to the hospital to visit your mother." "Really?" Daphne Snow looked up at him. Seeing hope and joy dancing in her eyes, Victor Gale awkwardly added that lunch had to be returned. Hearing this, Daphne Snow couldn't help but feel disappointed. She mumbled softly, "It takes 2 hours to get to the hospital and back. It is now 9 o'clock, and lunchtime is at 12 o'clock. Then I only have 1 hour at the hospital," Victor Gale said coldly. "If you feel that's too short, then don't go." Daphne Snow quickly replied, "I will definitely return before lunch." Seeing his expression unchanged and still cold, Daphne Snow felt anxious, afraid he would change his mind and retract his words. So, she stood on her tiptoes and affectionately kissed his cheek, carefully saying, "I will obediently listen to you and won't make you angry." After Victor Gale left, driver Ethan Frost entered, slightly bowing to Daphne Snow, then announced, "Miss, the general manager said that when you go to the hospital, I should take you to and from. Taking me to and from is just a convenient way to keep an eye on me, right?" Sitting in Ethan Frost's car, they arrived at the hospital. Daphne Snow entered Serena Grace's hospital room, where Serena Grace was currently recovering from surgery. The color on Serena Grace's face was pale, and she looked very haggard. Daphne Snow felt heartbroken. She approached Serena Grace's bed and covered her with a blanket, then saw Serena Grace open her eyes. She gently asked, "Did I wake you up, Mom?" "Oh, actually, I wasn't in a deep sleep." Seeing her daughter, Serena Grace smiled, but then suddenly remembered and asked, "Daphne Snow, why didn't you come yesterday?" Daphne Snow stiffened a bit, then quickly forced a smile and told a kind lie, "Because I just graduated from college, some friends have started working, and a few are planning to leave C-room, so we gathered a bit. I didn't expect to drink too much and be late." Hearing Daphne Snow's answer, Serena Grace breathed a sigh of relief. "Oh, I thought something happened to you." Mom asked Dad, and he said he didn't know. "How could that be? Aren't you sitting right here?" Daphne Snow pretended to smile comfortably, then asked Serena Grace with concern, "After the surgery, what did the doctor say?" Serena Grace looked at Daphne Snow with a proud gaze, signaling that the surgery was very successful. As long as I recover well, if nothing unexpected happens, then, Daphne Snow nodded, pretending to be excited as she informed Serena Grace, Mom, do you know? The Stark family has resurrected and returned to its rightful path. Hearing this news, Serena Grace would show how delighted she was, but she looked at Daphne Snow with caution. Suddenly, the situation reversed. Did your dad tell you to do anything? Hearing Serena Grace's question, Daphne Snow was a bit surprised and couldn't react in time. She asked back in astonishment, Mom, why aren't you happy that the family resolved the crisis? How could I be? Serena Grace appeared very tired, yet she kept an eye on Daphne Snow, warningly saying, Daphne, if your dad tells you to do something, you must consult with me first, don't act impulsively, and especially don't blindly agree, harming yourself and destroying your own future. Daphne Snow didn't understand why Serena Grace was so sensitive. She just blankly nodded and then chatted with Serena Grace about some other things. This made Daphne Snow completely unaware. What Serena Grace said that day, the story hidden behind it, was something she could never have imagined. However, that's another story. When they left the hospital, it was already 11 o'clock. Ethan Frost drove Daphne Snow back to the villa. After that, Ethan Frost got out of the car and opened the door for Daphne Snow. As he was getting out, Ethan Frost suddenly called Daphne Snow back, Mississippi. Daphne Snow turned around, what is it? The bracelet that the CEO gave you, aren't you wearing it? Yesterday, when shopping at the shopping mall, Ethan Frost had always followed behind, so he naturally saw what happened at the jewelry store and also heard Victor Gale talking to Daphne Snow. Daphne Snow looked a bit displeased and embarrassed. She found an excuse, it was too expensive, I was afraid of ruining it. Miss, you should still wear it. Even you are here to make things difficult for me. Hearing Ethan Frost say that, Daphne Snow felt a bit angry. Miss, you misunderstood. Ethan Frost hurriedly explained, he actually only sympathized with Daphne Snow. If you do as the CEO said, it will be a bit more comfortable. That statement echoed again. Daphne Snow recalled when she went to the lingerie store, the staff had once said the same thing to her. And now someone was repeating that statement. What he said felt like an order, I absolutely cannot violate it, right? Biting her lip, she forced herself to speak, all right, I will wear it. Then I won't disturb you anymore, Mississippi. Ethan Frost turned to leave. At noon, Victor Gale did not return for lunch and did not make a phone call. But Daphne Snow truly knew that, despite this, all her actions were within his sight. In the afternoon, Daphne Snow stayed in the villa with nothing to do. She wanted to visit Serena Grace and take the opportunity to stop by the bookstore to buy a few books. When she was in school, she really enjoyed being in the library, where she could spend the whole afternoon. But when she was preparing to go out, she remembered that her freedom was restricted, and her lips curved into a bitter smile. After hesitating for a long time, Daphne Snow finally dialed the number of Victor Gale. On the other end, his usual cold voice rang out, what's the matter? Daphne Snow did not tell him that she wanted to go to the hospital, only carefully asked, I want to go to the bookstore to buy a few books, is that okay? Victor Gale understood Daphne Snow's desire to go out but still agreed to let her buy books. What books do you want to see? I'll have the driver take you. But I want to choose by myself. Her voice came from her throat, carrying a hint of pleading. Do you want to go out and see if your mother is there? Daphne Snow's expression changed, she really did have this intention. If you allow it. But hearing the voice of Victor Gale, she bit her lip, and Daphne Snow gently said, of course I will listen to you. You are only allowed to go to the bookstore to buy books, and you are not allowed to go to the hospital. After hearing this, Daphne Snow felt a deep pang in her heart, and tears of grievance fell from her eyes. With a slight sob under the eaves, she asked, really, I can't go? Hearing her soft cry, Victor Gale paused from extinguishing his cigarette, the smoke swirling up and obscuring his handsome features, leaving one to wonder what he was thinking. Then she heard her careful explanation. When I left this morning, my mother looked pale, and I was very worried. Victor Gale remained silent for a long time, then said, Go, but don't take too long. Thank you, Victor Gale, I will leave early and come back early. Victor Gale did not reply, only coldly asked her, Is there anything else? No. He coldly hung up the phone. Daphne Snow first went to see Serena Grace, then went to the bookstore to buy a few books, and then returned to the villa. Dinner was still only for her. Victor Gale did not come back. She felt comfortable with that. It was after 7 p.m. Ethan Frost stepped in. Miss Snow, Chief Executive Officer asked me to pick you up. What for? Daphne Snow instinctively asked. Ethan Frost took out a beautiful gown. Then he waved, and a hairstylist approached. Ethan Frost explained, Miss, the Chief Executive Officer asked you to prepare a bit for the evening party. This is the designer, he will help you style your hair. What evening party? Daphne Snow felt a bit annoyed. At least, she should have been informed in advance. Why this sudden notification now? I don't know either, Ethan Frost sincerely advised. Daphne Snow. I see it's getting late, you should just follow the Chief Executive Officer's orders. Again with the orders, Daphne Snow changed into the gown and let the designer style her hair. After that, she got into Ethan Frost's car, heading towards a luxurious private club. In Daphne Snow's view, she saw Victor Gale, but he wasn't alone. Beside him was a tall woman, whose perfect S-curve was entirely visible from the side, alluring. Her face was also very beautiful and delicate. When Victor Gale saw Daphne Snow, he didn't stop. The woman beside him looped her arm through his, heading toward the banquet hall, in an intimate manner, carrying a hint of ambiguity. Daphne Snow's assistant ran over to Daphne Snow and said, Miss Snow, the general manager wants you to go inside. He will find you when he needs you. Oh, he is just a backup or an old relic. Clearly, he has a girlfriend by his side, yet he still calls for you. It's just to be prepared for when he needs someone, always ready to serve, right? As Daphne Snow entered the hall, she realized this was a charity gala, a charity event for the upper class. Everything looked so luxurious and noble, each guest wore magnificent outfits, elegantly made up, bustling around in the banquet hall, creating a lively scene. Daphne Snow held a champagne glass, looking for a darker corner to sit down, feeling uneasy, a bit nervous, and very unaccustomed to places like this. Even though she was the daughter of Olivia Snow, the young lady of the Snow family, Olivia Snow had never taken her to any parties. Moreover, always busy with her studies, she wasn't very interested in these things. Therefore, this was the first time she had been to places like this. The chatter around her was loud, discussing Victor Gale and the beautiful women by his side. Look at Victor Gale with Miss Smith from Smith Ventures. Laughter and chatter filled the air, but one could sense that the good times were about to end. He bought a bag that suited her very well, one was the young master of the story, and the other was the daughter of a wealthy family. With their talent and beauty, it wouldn't be long before news of their engagement would spread. Daphne Snow slightly curled her lips, he was about to get married or engaged, yet he kept her by his side. Was she a secret lover, a mistress who couldn't see the light? Just then, a man around 27 or 28 approached. He elegantly sat down next to Daphne Snow. He looked at her for a moment and then spoke, Who are you? I don't think I've met you before. Daphne Snow looked up. This man had a handsome face, deep black eyes with a hint of light purple, making them even deeper. The cold light in his eyes added an air of arrogance. He had a high nose and distinctly shaped lips, giving him a strong yet very charming presence. This is my first time attending a party like this, so it's normal that you haven't seen me before. Daphne Snow's heart raced slightly, not because of the man's handsome appearance, but due to a bit of nervousness. The atmosphere at this party was quite awkward. Daphne Snow stared thoughtfully at Alexander Reed. He asked, "What is your name?" At first, Daphne Snow didn't intend to tell him. But the man in front of her wouldn't leave. Not wanting to drag it out too much, she finally spoke up. "Daphne Snow." Alexander Reed assessed Daphne Snow from head to toe, his eyes filled with the longing of a hunter. The woman before him was petite and innocent, she truly was a delightful treat. Noticing Alexander Reed's gaze, she scanned the hall, searching for the figure of Victor Gale. At that moment, Victor Gale was also looking this way. When he saw Alexander Reed next to Daphne Snow, his expression became complicated. But it seemed she had come here alone. Suddenly, Alexander Reed extended his hand to Daphne Snow and said, "Then you will be my dance partner tonight." His words didn't sound like an invitation but rather a command, with an arrogant posture as he stared at Daphne Snow, as if accepting his invitation was a privilege. "I'm sorry, Just as Daphne Snow was about to refuse, she was cut off by his forceful words. "Neither of us has a dance partner tonight, so why refuse so hastily? Or do you truly look down on me and refuse me? If that is the case, then I must inform you that you are already." Victor Gale saw this scene in his eyes, a dangerous glint flashing. Phoebe Smith, standing beside Victor Gale, caught his gaze and looked over. When she saw Daphne Snow and Alexander Reed in a tense situation, she smiled slightly. General Manager Reed of Reed Enterprises was indeed somewhat formidable. Is silence the default? Or does she want to continue rejecting me? Alexander Reed looked at Daphne Snow and coldly said, "Or do you want to list more single gentlemen? It must be known that most of the single women here tonight have thoughts like that." "I'm sorry, I'm not what you think," Daphne Snow frowned, very displeased with the man's behavior in front of her. "There are many outstanding single women in the room, surely they would be more suitable to be your dance partner." After saying this, Daphne Snow stood up intending to leave. "Stop!" Alexander Reed suddenly tightened his grip on Daphne Snow's hand, his eyes filled with danger as he looked at her. "Do you think that women whom I, Alexander Reed, take notice of can easily leave without my permission? Let go of my hand." Daphne Snow was a little flustered, struggling to break free from Alexander Reed's grasp, angrily saying, "What do you really want?" His deep gaze assessed Daphne Snow, and he patiently replied with one sentence. "My dance partner tonight. Be my dance partner. You don't have a choice. She is my dance partner." A cold voice came through. Everyone looked in that direction. The person who appeared was William Knight, the CEO of Knight Enterprises. He was a young and talented individual, a rare business genius. After Knight Enterprises took over him, the range of industries under his leadership immediately tripled, spanning many fields and currently on an unstoppable rise. Alexander Reed stared coldly at William Knight as he approached her. To say she had no worries would be a lie, after all, William Knight's power was well known. Moreover, becoming an enemy of Knight Enterprises also required careful consideration. However, due to pride, he did not immediately let go. Daphne Snow looked in the direction of the man approaching her. His handsome face seemed sculpted, with clear-cut features. His angular face was truly extraordinarily beautiful. His appearance seemed wild, but the sudden flash of gold in his eyes made others hesitant to underestimate him. His eyebrows were like swords, and his long, peach-shaped eyes easily made one lose their way. His nose was high and straight, and his lips always wore a beautiful and charming curve. Wherever he went, a fresh mint scent wafted through the air. Every gesture displayed an elegance that was impeccable. "Mr. Reed, this is my dance partner, so please let go of her." William Knight stood there, just a few steps away from Alexander Reed, but the aura emanating from him was extremely dangerous, creating a strong sense of pressure on others. Alexander Reed felt flustered, although she didn't want to, she had to let go because she felt intimidated by William Knight. Since she is Mr. Knight dance partner, I won't force her anymore. Alexander Reed left in anger, but everyone's attention was drawn to this scene. Then, William Knight looked at Daphne Snow and asked, "Are you all right? Thank you for helping me." Because Alexander Reed had just attacked her aggressively, Daphne Snow's heart was racing, and the feeling of panic had not yet subsided. She apologetically looked at William Knight. "I'm sorry, I need to use the restroom for a moment." Unlike Alexander Reed, William Knight smirked and replied, "Of course, please go ahead." Daphne Snow hurried into the restroom, looking in the mirror and realizing she couldn't help but laugh. Tonight, she felt like a joke being here. She didn't know when it happened, but as soon as she left the restroom, her wrist was suddenly grabbed by someone. Daphne Snow startled and only then realized it was Victor Gale. He was not cheerful and spoke up, "What are you doing?" Victor Gale pulled Daphne Snow into the break room, lifting her chin. Seeing her pale face, he laughed, "What's wrong? If you're still angry, what right do you have to be mad at me for not saving you earlier?" Daphne Snow lifted her downcast eyes to look at him. "I'm just a toy for you, Victor Gale. When you're happy, you reward me with a kiss, when you're not, I have no rights at all." Victor Gale's expression darkened, his patience turning into sarcasm. "Congratulations on still remembering your place, just an object, a mere toy." That's right." Daphne Snow replied coldly with a trembling voice, "So you already have a female companion by your side, yet you still called me here, putting me in this situation. It's convenient for you to toy with me whenever you like, isn't it?" "You're absolutely right." He gazed at her intently, the mocking smile still on his face. "There are always dull moments at the party, but with you here, it's different. As you said, when I'm bored, I can freely make you suffer." "Indeed, this is not a bad choice." Daphne Snow froze, staring at him, her eyes filled with hatred. "Hate, go ahead and hate fiercely." Her mocking gaze made him grip her head tightly, his thin lips ruthlessly capturing her rosy ones. Though the action was somewhat ambiguous, his voice remained cold as usual. "Add a little more hatred, I wouldn't mind," he said, then forcefully blocked her lips, dominatingly stealing her breath away. Surprisingly, Daphne Snow did not resist. Instead, she tightly wrapped her arms around his neck, embracing his ravaging kiss, taking the initiative to pamper him, something she had never done before. Victor Gale was astonished, and he immediately coldly pushed her away. "Are you not satisfied with my proactive pampering?" Daphne Snow's voice gently rang out, devoid of any emotion, cold and bland. In Victor Gale's ears, that voice seemed to affirm, almost asking, "Am I humiliating myself? Isn't this what you want to see?" She smiled like a pear blossom trembling in the cold wind. "And also, have you played enough? If you have, please let me go." His deep-set eyes suddenly darkened, and in the next moment, a sense of danger emerged. Victor Gale looked at Daphne Snow as she took each step towards the door, a sudden wave of anger rising within him. He immediately pulled Daphne Snow back into his embrace, ruthlessly declaring that it was still not enough. Daphne Snow's tear-filled eyes stared directly at him. The scorching breath of Victor Gale brushed against her cheek, coming close to her delicate ear, exuding a dangerous breath. Therefore, she had to remain at the party so that he could play as he wished when necessary. Daphne Snow felt her body tremble, her resilient tears swirling in her eye sockets. She saw him coldly release her, then walk away with steady steps back to the banquet hall, with an incredibly elegant posture. Daphne Snow didn't know how long she had been in the resting area. It wasn't until her mood had stabilized that she returned to the hall. At this moment, the gentle melody of the waltz began to play. Victor Gale and Phoebe Smith beside him quickly stepped onto the dance floor. Daphne Snow stood there when suddenly someone next to her politely invited her to dance. "Daphne, may I invite you to dance a waltz?" That familiar way of addressing her made it seem like they had known each other for a long time. Looking in the direction of the voice, she saw a boy with fair skin, a handsome face, whose elegance also bore an attractive charm, both good-looking and warm. There are also unique characteristics of weightlessness and excellence. This man is not Adrian Blackwell of the past, so who is he? Monitor, why are you here? Adrian Blackwell did not immediately answer Daphne Snow but politely extended his hand towards her. Daphne Snow's heart raced. Back in school, she had once been infatuated with this man. Only time has passed, and now she fears he might have a girlfriend. Dismissing her awkwardness, she did not refuse his invitation. Instead, she placed her hand in his and stepped onto the dance floor with him. In her ear, she heard the deep voice of Adrian Blackwell resonate, "The charity party tonight is organized by me." She didn't know if it was a love from the past, but every gesture of Adrian Blackwell was strangely alluring. The excitement in Daphne Snow's heart lingered, and she realized her face was slightly flushed. Suddenly startled, Daphne Snow looked down. "What's wrong?" Adrian Blackwell's voice rang out with concern. Hearing his voice, Daphne Snow lifted her head. But in a moment of panic, she accidentally touched his lips. Daphne Snow was startled, instinctively swerving to the side, her face turning even redder. "Ah, right, I'm sorry." Adrian Blackwell smiled gently, his eyes avoiding hers. However, almost immediately, their gazes met again. The cold, introspective eyes of Adrian Blackwell had a strange allure. She noticed the corners of Adrian Blackwell's lips subtly curve up, creating an alluring arc, deep enough to be hard to decipher. Daphne Snow was flustered. A song ended, and Victor Gale's dance partner came over to him. Meanwhile, William Knight invited Daphne Snow to dance another tune. Since William Knight had helped her earlier, she hesitated to refuse. As they changed partners, Victor Gale and William Knight swapped partners with each other. Victor Gale leaned closer to Daphne Snow's ear and mockingly asked her, "How do you feel dancing with Adrian Blackwell?" Daphne Snow was slightly taken aback, recalling what had happened tonight, suddenly realizing something. But she still asked, "What exactly is your purpose in bringing me here?" The ambiguous tone lingered in her ear, his hot breath brushing against it. She hesitated to speak, looking at the man she once cherished, uncertain if her heart had truly stirred in that moment. "How do you know that?" At that time, Daphne Snow liked Adrian Blackwell, but it became something impossible. Only a few close friends knew the truth. Her good friend, Diana Brooks, had special feelings for me. Do you think she would easily reveal all her secrets to me? Victor Gale didn't want to hide anything. On the contrary, he generously shared with Daphne Snow. "How would you feel when your good friend betrays you?" Daphne Snow seemed a bit upset. She looked at Victor Gale, waiting for him to say what would come next. The reason she waited was that she wasn't foolish enough to think that this man would create an opportunity for her and Adrian Blackwell. She looked up at him and asked, "What do you want to do?" Clearly, the man she liked was right in front of her, but she had to try to please another man. Victor Gale pulled Daphne Snow close, making her press against his solid chest. When they met, they could clearly feel each other's heartbeats. "Tell me, isn't it very interesting? That is precisely why I brought you here tonight. Hating someone isn't just about torturing the body but also the soul. This might be the deepest pain." A smile blossomed on her lips, yet it was full of despair. Alexander Reed lost face because of the recent dance incident. Feeling uneasy, Diana Brooks did not turn back to the blazing fire on the dance floor but simply held a glass of champagne while sitting in a dark corner of the party. She gently took a sip, her mood not good, standing in a corner. Clearly, she was Victor Gale's dance partner tonight, but she realized that Victor Gale's attention was always on Daphne Snow. The corners of her lips tightened, jealousy welling up inside her. Diana Brooks had liked Victor Gale for a long time, but he never noticed her. After a few dances, he hadn't invited her even once. Tonight, she kept an eye on Victor Gale, recalling that he had once asked about Daphne Snow, which made her feel alarmed. Her eyes flashed with a hint of coldness. After a while, she withdrew her gaze and accidentally noticed Phoebe Smith. After pondering for a moment, she walked over with an elegant demeanor. "Miss Smith, aren't you going to dance? Is something wrong?" Phoebe Smith coldly glanced at Diana Brooks, her gaze still reflecting the image of Victor Gale dancing with Daphne Snow on the dance floor. Her smile briefly revealed a deeper meaning. "Clearly, Miss Smith is Gale's dance partner, but I see that Gale's attention is always focused on Daphne Snow." Diana Brooks spoke profoundly. "Do you think Gale is fond of Daphne Snow? You seem very concerned about Gale." Phoebe Smith smiled mockingly. Could it be that Miss Diana likes Sir Gale? And why did she directly call out that woman's name? Surely she and that woman know each other, right? Talking behind someone's back, could it be that it's due to Stella Bright's unpredictability? Or is there some other intention? Do these things matter? Diana Brooks coldly mentioned Sir Gale. "Why does Miss Smith have to guard against me like this? You need to know that your biggest barrier right now is Daphne Snow, not me." Phoebe Smith coldly looked at Diana Brooks. "What do you want to say?" "Sir Gale once privately asked me if Daphne Snow liked someone." Diana Brooks deliberately lowered her voice. "If you don't care about someone, why would you be interested in finding out these things?" "What?" Phoebe Smith was a bit surprised. She skeptically said, "But in the past, when Daphne Snow was in trouble, didn't he step up to help her?" "That was just on the surface." Diana Brooks spoke up. "Victor Gale didn't step up because he already had a dance partner. If we say Daphne Snow is his dance partner, it seems a bit hard to explain. But his good friend, William Knight, is single and came here to help Victor Gale out for Daphne Snow, which really makes sense." Clearly, Phoebe Smith's mood worsened. But when she glanced at Diana Brooks and her appearance, she became calm again. What if Diana Brooks is right? Daphne Snow's relationship has not been publicly acknowledged by Victor Gale, while I am regarded as his dance partner. There is simply no comparison between the two of us." Hearing Phoebe Smith speak softly and leisurely, Diana Brooks suddenly felt a twinge of anger. At first, she intended to use Phoebe Smith as a shield, but now it seemed like a futile effort. She coldly turned away to leave, but then saw Alexander Reed. A glimmer of hope appeared. She approached Alexander Reed and asked, "Is CEO Thomas Reed here drinking alone to drown her sorrows?" Alexander Reed didn't even bother to look up and coldly replied, "What does it have to do with you?" Diana Brooks didn't mind, continuing, "Actually, Daphne Snow is not William Knight's dance partner at all." "What are you talking about?" Alexander Reed looked up at Diana Brooks and said angrily, "What do you know to say that?" "Because I know Daphne Snow, I know she came here alone tonight." Diana Brooks paused for a moment before continuing, "Moreover, look, her ambitions are not small. She is not only seducing William Knight, but she is also entangled with Victor Gale." Following Diana Brooks's words, Alexander Reed glanced over, and indeed, the dance partner next to Victor Gale was Daphne Snow. He looked with a cold gaze, containing a dangerous breath, gritting his teeth. That woman really dared to play with him. Not just to play with him, but through the slanderous words of Diana Brooks. He completely despised her, feeling that Victor Gale and William Knight were both better than him. Therefore, she agreed with them and coldly rejected him. The clear gaze of Alexander Reed became deeper. Her lips parted, resembling a cold crack. "Daring to look down on me, she must pay the price for it." Seeing the anger in Alexander Reed's eyes, Diana Brooks knew that her purpose had been achieved. She silently laughed coldly in her heart, just waiting. As long as there was an obstacle blocking her, she would definitely eliminate it. Moreover, she believed that she would stand beside Victor Gale, laughing until the end. Amid the warm applause, the passionate music finally came to an end, and the music became lively. The host of the auction, Adrian Blackwell, stood on stage and began to speak, "Dear guests, hello." Looking at Adrian Blackwell, This man felt like an angel to her, but only Daphne Snow knew that she would never have a fate with him. Beside her, Victor Gale glanced at Daphne Snow, but he didn't actually say anything right away. But this time, Adrian Blackwell had finished. As they descended from the platform, waiting for him was his girlfriend. The two of them were truly very intimate. So, are you jealous? Victor Gale bent down and whispered mockingly in Daphne Snow's ear, isn't it very hopeful that the woman beside Adrian Blackwell is you right now? Does Daphne Snow secretly wish for that as well? Unfortunately, you, Daphne Snow, can only be by my side, Victor Gale. Victor Gale spoke to Daphne Snow with no mercy, his voice truly ruthless. Even if you continue to act, you must deeply immerse yourself in the role. The prologue is over, and the charity auction officially begins. Adrian Blackwell donated a jade for auction, Victor Gale donated an expensive watch, William Knight donated a jewelry necklace, and General Director Tate donated a luxurious ring. The auction did not go very smoothly. After the earrings were auctioned off for $2 million, he looked at Daphne Snow. Tonight's auction, many people have donated their precious or favorite items. I wonder what surprises the young lady Snow will bring us. Clearly aiming for someone else. The silver lips of Daphne Snow curled slightly, forming a more alluring contour. This bracelet was the one that Daphne Snow had thrown on the ground in the jewelry store. He said to let her wear it as a reminder of her status as his lover. However, in this moment, she dared to offer it as a gift. Daphne Snow sat back down, but felt uncomfortable, as if she could feel that cold gaze staring intently, as if wanting to tear her apart into pieces. Her heart raced. Just now, Victor Gale had not helped her. She no longer had the strength to bid. All of this made her impulsively take off the bracelet, without considering the consequences. The host saw that no one in the audience had bid yet and asked, is there anyone who wants to bid? It wasn't that Daphne Snow's bracelet wasn't valuable or beautiful, but at this charity gala, although the guests all came in the name of charity, in their hearts, they calculated how to connect with the elite. In the eyes of those people, Daphne Snow was just an inconspicuous person, so they didn't care at all. Therefore, naturally, no one kindly helped her raise the bid or support her. When the atmosphere fell into awkwardness, someone spoke up, $1 million is from Adrian Blackwell. Daphne Snow glanced at him, smiling gratefully. Victor Gale sat elegantly in the armchair, paying attention to the changes on Daphne Snow's face as she received help from Adrian Blackwell, feeling both grateful and somewhat emotional, with a hint of shyness. His lips curled slightly into a cold smile. Daphne Snow of his, when did she need other men to rescue her? 1.5 million, rang out in Victor's powerful voice. Upon hearing Victor Gale's bid, Daphne Snow instinctively glanced at him, only to find him looking back at her. Her heart suddenly raced. Director Gale offers 1.5 million, does anyone want to bid higher? 2 million. Adrian Blackwell and Victor Gale exchanged glances, both radiating a strong aura, neither willing to back down, as if a battle would erupt in the next moment. Everyone was watching these two, one was Director Gale, the other the heir of Blackwell Corporation. They stood off against each other like a storm was approaching. Daphne Snow's heart tightened even more. 2.8 million. As the atmosphere in the room became tense, William Knight broke the stalemate. With his intervention, it was no longer a battle between the two sides. If one side retreated, it wouldn't be too humiliating. A cold smile flashed in Adrian Blackwell's eyes, but it disappeared in an instant. He spoke as the host. The charity gala tonight is prepared by me. Since CEO Gale and CEO Knight both like that bracelet, I naturally cannot displease the guests. He withdrew in this way, not losing face and bringing the atmosphere back to a more comfortable state. Thank you, CEO Blackwell, for your consideration. William Knight politely mentioned, then looked toward Victor Gale. CEO Gale, the woman who donated this bracelet must also want to do charity work. How about you gather enough money to bid for it? What do you think? Victor Gale smiled lightly, naturally agreeing to William Knight's goodwill. He looked up. Then thank you, CEO Blackwell and CEO Gale. Thank you, CEO Gale, for bidding on this bracelet for 3 million. Now, may I invite Daphne Snow to hand over the bracelet to CEO Gale? The host announced as the receptionist delicately brought down the exquisite box from the stage and handed the bracelet to Victor Gale. Suddenly, the voice of Adrian Blackwell echoed in the hall. CEO Gale likes this bracelet, planning to give it to the lady beside him, right? Phoebe Smith felt extremely complicated inside, but her face showed a gentle smile. She looked at Victor Gale, seeing him give the bracelet to his assistant beside him, then raised the necklace he had just bid on, and gave it to Phoebe Smith. He always misunderstands. Compared to that bracelet, this necklace is more suitable for my female friend, Phoebe Smith. It is noble and elegant, Phoebe Smith is soft like water. When wearing the necklace, Phoebe Smith shines brilliantly. Daphne Snow bowed her head, and a complex emotion surged within her. The auction continued, featuring all valuable items donated by the guests. Daphne Snow's gaze swept over Adrian Blackwell, then carefully looked towards Victor Gale. Victor Gale's eyes occasionally glanced over, although it was just a gentle curve, it made Daphne Snow feel extremely dazzling and dangerous. The auction had lasted over an hour and was finally nearing its end. Adrian Blackwell went on stage to deliver a closing speech, and all the guests stood up to applaud. The host girls brought champagne to the guests, and Daphne Snow was no exception. She poured a glass of champagne, lifted it to her lips for a sip, and unconsciously searched for the figure of Victor Gale. She discovered there were many people beside him. Indeed, it was the bright moon among the stars. When she turned her head away, she unexpectedly found Phoebe Smith looking at her, with eyes that could not hide hostility. Daphne Snow felt a sense of unease in her heart. Since the auction began, it was this woman who had discerned the relationship between her and Victor Gale, thus considering her an opponent. When their gazes met, Phoebe Smith glanced to the side. Daphne Snow was like a young lady, having only a transactional relationship with Victor Gale. Even this caught the attention of the woman beside him, which was quite amusing. When Victor Gale stepped out from the crowd, he saw Daphne Snow hurriedly heading towards the restroom. He observed her back, and a complex light flashed in his eyes. Soon after, he chased after her. Daphne Snow didn't know what was happening, she only felt a surge of heat rising, her face becoming increasingly red and hot. For a moment, it seemed like she wanted to rip off the clothes on her body, perhaps that would be more comfortable. Of course, her rationality still remained, and she naturally wouldn't do that. Therefore, she thought of the restroom. Just as she was about to enter, a strong hand suddenly pulled her into an embrace. A male voice rang out, "Why is your face so red?" Daphne Snow widened her eyes in panic, but when she clearly saw the person in front of her, her mood relaxed. Victor Gale lifted her chin, his eyes narrowed. Perhaps he was recalling the scene when Adrian Blackwell had helped her earlier, and his heart suddenly raced. "It's too hot, I feel too hot." Daphne Snow completely ignored the man's teasing words. Victor Gale looked intently at the unusual behavior of Daphne Snow. "What are you drinking?" In fact, the moment he met Daphne Snow, her unusually flushed face had raised Victor Gale's suspicions. Now, seeing her reaction, he felt even more certain. Daphne Snow defended herself, "Champagne. You're burning up, your face is bright red, there's definitely something wrong with the champagne you just drank." Daphne Snow genuinely felt very hot, her face also flushed. Victor Gale's gaze darted quickly, and his lips curved slightly with amusement. "I really underestimated your charm. You've only just attended a party, and someone is already interested in you. Who spiked your champagne?" Daphne Snow inadvertently recalled the jealous look from Phoebe Smith earlier. She looked directly into Victor Gale's eyes. "If I say that Phoebe Smith plotted against me, would you believe me? Is there any reason? Victor Gale stared deeply at Daphne Snow. Because she likes you, she wants to eliminate the other women around you. Daphne Snow struggled to control her body. The temperature kept rising, welcoming his gaze. Does this reason have merit? Victor Gale raised an eyebrow. Are you so confident because your hands and feet have frozen in your champagne? Humph, gently. Her voice was really familiar. It seemed we were close to a good moment. Daphne Snow suddenly smiled. So, I'm sure you will favor her and not believe me. Victor Gale lifted Daphne Snow's chin. Are you jealous? Between us, it's just a transaction, how can you feel jealous? Daphne Snow coldly wanted to push Victor Gale away. Let me go, where are you planning to go? Victor dangerously stared at her. Daphne Snow struggled, using cold water to wake me up. Is this form of self-protection allowed by you? Looking at the elegant and cold face of the woman, which was now filled with desire. Her eyes lit up, shining with allure, her rosy cheeks enticing. That charming and gentle beauty truly captivated everyone. However, he remained resolute, and Victor Gale suddenly felt uncomfortable. In the next moment, his lips touched hers. Don't, this is the hallway. She felt her heart race amidst the chaotic emotions. Victor Gale released his grip on her. The hot breath swept across her cheeks. A vague sound spread in her ears. I will make you satisfied tonight. Daphne Snow was startled. What? Victor Gale curved his lips, and then she saw the man let go of her hand and say, Is it true that Phoebe Smith plotted to harm you? You will know in a moment. Daphne watched the figure of the man leaving. Daphne Snow felt her whole body heat up. She curled up in the corner, and she didn't know when the sound of hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway. Daphne Snow looked over in panic. A figure approached, with a cold, deceitful smile on his face. I didn't expect you to hide here. Her whole body was burning, the heat surged up. Her small face was flushed like a flower, and her lips were panting. Suddenly, the voice of the man rang in Daphne Snow's ear, causing her to jump. She looked over and realized it was Alexander Reed. She thought that the drug in the champagne was added by Phoebe Smith, because Phoebe Smith was Victor Gale's girlfriend and had just targeted her. Moreover, when she drank the champagne, she even glanced at her. Alexander Reed approached Daphne Snow, his gaze both cold and hot. Looking into Alexander Reed's eyes, that light carried an undisguised possessiveness and hidden coldness. So who do you think it will be? Daphne Snow took a breath, panic making her retreat. You've laid your hands on my champagne, what do you want? A man and a woman in the same room, what do you think I want to do? Alexander Reed laughed coldly. He stepped closer, reaching out to grab Daphne Snow. Don't come near. Daphne Snow startled, warning him in panic. What you're doing is against the law, you could go to jail. Do you think I'm scared? Alexander Reed showed no fear, his gaze looking down at Daphne Snow. Once I dare to confront you, I won't be afraid. Besides, I'm secretly playing with you, who would know? Daphne Snow felt even more panicked. Alexander Reed continued, unabashed, do you dare tell your boss, Victor Gale, that you were assaulted by another man, so he can help you? Shouldn't you keep this a secret to maintain your image in front of your boss, so you don't lose this big tree, the one that brings in money? How do you know that? Daphne Snow was increasingly astonished. In the party, when Alexander Reed asked Daphne Snow to be his dance partner, Victor Gale clearly did not lend a helping hand. But right in front of him, Alexander Reed pointed out Victor Gale. Humph, Alexander Reed snorted coldly, if you want to deceive me, you must pay a price. Daphne Snow panicked and stepped back until there was nowhere left to retreat. She raised one hand in front of her to prevent Alexander Reed from getting closer, increasingly anxious, raising her voice, don't come closer. If you get near, I will call for help. Calling for help, Alexander Reed was not angry, on the contrary, he laughed loudly. He looked at Daphne Snow without haste, as if focusing on the prey in his hands, enjoying the process. What are you laughing at? Daphne Snow warily looked at Alexander Reed, while her other hand fumbled for something behind her. Ha ha ha, I'm laughing because you won't dare to call, nor will you call. Why not? Because, Alexander Reed suddenly took a step forward, completely losing patience, and forcefully controlled Daphne Snow. He even raised his hand to grasp both of her hands, pushing them forward, because you are always talking to me to buy time while you are looking for an opportunity to call for help. A loud thud echoed. Daphne Snow was being twisted by Alexander Reed, causing the phone in her hand to fall to the ground. She felt immense pain, her knees drawn up as she struggled to break free, but in the end, she could not resist the strength of the man. The disparity in power was evident between the two. Let me go. Let go. Don't hold your breath. Alexander Reed coldly laughed, completely indifferent to Daphne Snow's resistance. He leaned down to kiss her, his hand becoming even more aggressive, overpowering her. Don't, please. Daphne Snow struggled desperately, panicking and confused, her resentment bubbling up. Victor Gale, where have you gone? Where have you really gone? You said you would see who drugged me, right? But why haven't you shown up yet? Relax, don't resist, or it will only cause you more pain. Alexander Reed suddenly gripped Daphne Snow's delicate chin, almost roughly, without any pity, sipping a gulp of champagne. The temperature in your body is rising little by little, you must be in need, right? Then let me please you, I will make you feel better. Get lost, stay away from me. Daphne Snow gritted her teeth with all her might. She no longer cared about anything else, only wanting to scream, help me, help me. But before the sound could spread, it was blocked by Alexander Reed. He swung his hand and slapped her, don't you know how to live or die? Did you think I would let you off just because I drank with you? He spoke in a threatening tone, but immediately felt a sharp pain as Daphne Snow bit him hard on the hand. Instinctively, he let go, what the hell, you dare to bite me. Daphne Snow immediately tried to run away, but like a child, she was forcefully pushed down to the ground by Alexander Reed. Blood dripped from his hand, cruel and carrying a fishy smell. But ultimately, his bloodthirsty gaze could not be defeated. He looked at Daphne Snow with malice, you think escaping is that easy? Don't come near. Help me, help me. Daphne Snow didn't have time to notice the sharp pain throughout her body as she stepped back. Alexander Reed merely smiled calculatingly. He leaned closer. Meanwhile, Victor Gale was elegantly enjoying red wine. He swirled the glass with the bright red liquid inside, his eyes narrowing but unable to conceal the brilliance within. Ethan Frost walked up beside Victor Gale, the general manager. The man nodded. He raised an eyebrow slightly, asking if there was anything unusual. Ms. Fuang was still chatting with everyone at the party, not moving an inch. In fact, a few minutes ago, Alexander Reed had left the hall. Victor Gale recalled when the party began, when Alexander Reed invited Daphne Snow to dance but was refused. Victor Gale looked at Alexander Reed with suspicion, wondering if he should send his subordinate to check. If it really was him, he feared it would be detrimental to Ms. Snow. Ethan Frost had expressed his thoughts and worries. Victor Gale observed the surroundings. At the party, Phoebe Smith was happily chatting and laughing with everyone, showing no signs of anything unusual. However, when he withdrew his gaze, he saw Diana Brooks looking at him in panic before quickly turning away. Victor Gale smiled enigmatically and said, "Wait a little longer, there might be some lost prey." Ethan Frost felt his palms sweating and stepped back. General Director Blackwell, the charity party tonight has been very successful, congratulations. Everything is thanks to everyone's support. I, Adrian Blackwell, would like to thank you all here. Adrian Blackwell smiled gently, raising his glass in an extremely elegant manner. This man smiled brightly, but his eyes showed no light, like a tiger smiling. It seems to be smiling, but inside it hides a dagger. It cannot be underestimated.